Well, again, thank you for having me here. NVIDIA has been a great host, and we've been doing these talks with them for a good long while. I typically always cover the same topic at Siggraph, which is the future of rendering, which is, of course, a prominent theme in the show. And the future of rendering is really interesting these days. I remember back when I was starting, I was pushing GPU ray tracing and path tracing, and of course now those things are pretty much commoditized. When you think about the future of rendering today, of course, lots of things are in the mix that are changing the way that things may go in the next year, much less the next decade or so. I always love sort of looking back at some of those legends in the industry, like Tim Sweeney and John Carmack. And Carmack and I worked together on a number of projects back in the Oculus days. So we have our own conference, RenderCon, and I usually get his input before I start the year off and prepare for that and for these Siggraph talks. So when I asked him about what the future of rendering would look like in 10 years, he's like, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out. And this was not just in 10 years, but even just the next couple of years. He sort of posited, well, neural filters seems like an obvious first step. But his prediction was completely replacing traditional rendering. He feels like it's 10 plus years out. And for the sake of transparency, this is the full email. And it's a lot. And the thing is, it's hard to know whether these predictions are going to play out. Remember, the first thing he says, I can't be sure, right? And so I wouldn't say every year, I'd say every few months, we find out more and more about where the rendering world is heading. And this talk is really just to take a snapshot of where I see things are at, how we're using rendering ourselves in our own productions. And of course, if you don't know about Otoy, we make Octane, the world's first and fastest unbiased GPU renderer. And we also, at least I founded another company called the Render Network. It's actually now a foundation, and it runs a decentralized GPU rendering service. The big takeaways, I think, as far as the future of rendering, there's a lot of controversy recently around the Blender Foundation taking money from Anthropic, but the truth is you're going to have agents and AI that are going to assist you inside of your DCC application. Blender is obviously an easy target, but it's real, it's useful. It has, whether you're an advanced user or a beginner, I think that's going to have a major impact on your workflow. Even if you're an expert user, having an AI sort of monitor how you work, being able to create shortcuts, being able to frankly vibe code extensions or build on your 3D tools is going to be a thing if it's not already. There's a lot of great technology that NVIDIA has provided with DLSS and, of course, hardware ray tracing. We're now able to get Octane with full path tracing, spectral rendering, all of it, to basically run in real time in the viewport with dynamic animations. This is the opening of Westworld. I remember it required 6,000 Octane bench, which used to be a rack of servers when it was first being rendered. And now, of course, it's basically running in real time on a 4090, 5090. We can also bring this technology to mobile. So, real-time path tracing is something that can extend beyond the cloud or beyond even the very highest end GPUs. There's many different techniques for that. I would also say the other important trend line, which we're building into Octane 2027, isn't just rendering to pixels, but rendering into splats. Not just Gaussian splats, but 4D splats, right, which have temporal properties. I would also posit that you're going to have something more like 8D Gaussian splats where you can have relighting information. So when you're rendering something that is meant to be so-called linear content, right, it's going to basically be holographic. And I think splats are a great intermediate step towards that. They've been standardized in USD and GLTF, where Otoy's on the standards bodies for both of those groups. And if you look at the USD spec, there's even sort of this outline of neural objects, right, which I think is really important for the future. So I do think that the future of rendering is neural. And in a lot of cases, I think for many reasons, for cost and for the ability to tap into many, many services, including agentic AI, it'll be hopefully decentralized. As I mentioned, the Render Network is one of our sister projects to Otoy proper. It's been used in tons of productions over the last 7-8 years, including many TV shows. It's all run on chain, and it basically provides huge amounts of GPU power, not just for GPU rendering, but also for AI jobs as well, and it's growing fast. So on the topic of world models and where that's heading, I think the big picture is world models aren't just a separate path from LLMs. There's a lot of thought behind the fact that maybe LLMs are a limiting factor, and that world models and an AI that's built on a physical system that can simulate the real world is where you'll have true AGI. You'll have companies that have been built around that. Chen famously left Meta and started a company just based around that. And in the real world, I remember, I think it was Siggraph of 25, maybe it was a year ago. This space moved so fast that I had this very slide about Genie 3, and it had just been announced, and we're all waiting to see how it would play out. And we do have access now to Genie 3 and other types of world models that can generate splats, for example. So we partnered with World Labs. They have a splat generator called Marble, integrated right into Octane. Octane, of course, loads splats, can render splats, and can even do relighting and many other effects. So, we've been sort of testing, well, how does Genie 3 work with, for example, this is a virtual set test that we were doing with a couple of photos from, unfortunately, a location that was redone, so it doesn't exist anymore, and we wanted to try it out as a virtual set. Genie did a pretty good job. Here it is running through Marble and running in Octane, and effectively, you don't need to run a world model live. You could just basically generate the world once, pull it in. And we were doing A/B tests on a lot of this stuff to see which one works better for production. And the truth is, generating a world and then loading it back in for production purposes as of 2026, it just works better. That doesn't mean that world models in the future won't surpass what we can do with a pre-generated world, but it's just very, very, very expensive to run these models live. And you don't have to limit yourself to what Genie can do, right? I mean, these are tests that we're doing with Genie, with Marble. Tencent has a open source world model this is running live. It's frame by frame, right? So it's completely generating every frame live. It's very impressive. Open, right? There's a lot of open weight models. There's Cosmos from NVIDIA. So world models are again, it's an absolutely integral part of the future. The question is, what's the cost-benefit ratio? And I think that what we really need is to have all the controls, all of the systems that we have in place in traditional 3D rendering, plus the ability to dynamically generate these things with the tools that AIs are best at: interpolation, filling those worlds with pieces that the artists may not want to have, or that they can do under direction of higher level artistry tools. And on the flip side, in Octane itself, we are still taking everything. Even if you generate something, our goal is that piece of data gets pulled into Octane, gets turned into a 3D model with materials, and we want to be able to render that quiescently. So to that end, we've been working on extending Octane just beyond normal PBR to diffraction, right? That's one of the harder things to do in an unbiased spectral path tracer, but we have that now running beautifully in Octane, and you can do almost any effect in the render in camera. And we just shipped this to users. It's an Octane 2027 Alpha 2. 2027 will be shipping the end of this year, but this is one of the really great new features, along with toon rendering, really powerful displacement mapping, and many other features that have been a long time coming in Octane. In terms of real-world workflows, for neural rendering, the important thing that we want to think about is, where does neural rendering allow you to have control the way that you would have in a DCC or even in Unreal Engine? And I think that that's where we're focused on. We want to provide that sweet spot between what a traditional 3D tool can do and where neural rendering can kick in. In terms of the real world use cases, it's pretty straightforward. You take a viewport that's GRU-shaded or even partially path traced, and then you can run even locally, right? This is LTX, which is a local model from Lightrix. They're a partner of ours, and you can do some really interesting effects with that with full control. Like, this is your scene, it's just being neurally rendered. As Jensen predicted, maybe every pixel will be neurally rendered versus ray traced. Who knows? Maybe a mixture of both. Our perspective is use the right tools for the right shot. Inside of Octane 2027, we've also fully enabled neural materials. These are materials that are completely, they just slot into a normal path-traced material slot, but they are generated from inputs from user, from photographs, from text, from other materials. You can modify them, so there's a neural stack. And that's another feature that I think certainly helps a lot of artists in terms of getting materials that they want, not having to be reliant on stock materials. So that's another feature that's shipping this year. And then separately from Octane and the Render Network, we've also created a web portal called Otoy Studio, where we collect Octane, Blender as a full web stream, and other services, neural tools, lots of partnerships with RTX, for example, Kling, Google, and others. And this is designed for you to assemble, and you can do this also within Octane, within a 3D tool, but this is also a web interface that allows you to mess with these things outside of it. And you have a timeline, you have a 3D editor, you have a node graph, and Otoy Studio also has full MCP integration, so you can connect that with Cloud Code and other things. And there's a Canvas system which allows you to access pretty much every model out there. We curate the best ones. I personally spend a lot of time working with the product team, making sure that whether it's generating a splat or 3D model or things that can be editing those same assets, all those elements are really well vetted. And we put Otoy Studio out there in September. It's gotten a lot more traction, I'd say, this year. And then there are projects that have been using it where it's been pretty incredible, the work that's been done. Beggars Canyon, this is an artist, Darren, who I brought onto our conference in April, and he showed how it was done. It was all done in Otoy Studio in Canvas a few months ago, which is an ancient times in terms of AI. I'm going to play about a minute of it, all done in Otoy Studio in the node graph. He's a Star Wars fan. This is all Star Wars fan fiction.
But we just don't have the resources for a mission of this magnitude. Prince Shizor's very powerful, very dangerous.
We cannot afford to divert what little strength we have left to hunt a single man.
We can't just leave him behind.
We have all made sacrifices, General. I assure you.
So the reason why this struck me as interesting, and I used it as an example, is this is all done in a web browser. There's no 3D tools. There's no, there are 3D tools that are integrated inside of the web browser you're seeing here. But this also shows that what's possible with one person with a low budget, effectively using a web browser to create stuff that's really good. Now, granted, if you listen to the talk that he did, at our conference, he spent a lot of time really getting the shots right and planning it out and all these things. A lot of the best work that you'll see, purely neural render stuff, comes from people that know 3D, that know how to make films, that know storytelling, that do storyboards, all of it. Now the full piece goes on for 15 minutes. I'm going to play about another minute or so of it because I want to show how these assets work within our traditional 3D pipeline or rendering pipeline. These are some of the tools we're building. If you're familiar with the Star Wars Cantina scene, this is a pretty faithful recreation of it, down to every little nook and cranny.
I'm telling you, I haven't seen him. I thought you and Boba go way back. You're awful. Are you crazy doing that in here?
He said before he gets here he had to stop in the last place in the galaxy he should ever be. That's all I know.
Jump ahead a little bit in time. So we have Luke here. And as far as, there are a lot of small changes that you can make as you're putting this piece together. And so as we were preparing for that conference in April, I was taking his shots, and you can load them back as splats, delightable splats, inside of Octane. So I can take any scene, and I can take things that are 3D generated. I can take things that are, that are footage. I can bring them into Blender. And the entire scene, it's 13 minutes or so, we can just go through it, and it's just a timeline like any other 3D asset. That, from a controllability and editing perspective, is absolutely essential. I don't even know how you'd finish a proper production without the ability to do that over anything that you're creating. Now, this is obviously leveraging a lot of generative tools, but if you're trying to blend those together, and I think you have whatever 300 productions now from, was it Netflix that are using generative tools? It is something where neural rendering, the convergence, still goes back to the 3D tools, and I think that as powerful as the generative pieces are, being able to bring them back in and turn them into 3D assets and edit them as 3D assets is essential, and it's a huge part of why I think some of these generative tools have a promise in future neural rendering pipelines. On the more mundane side of things, there's a great tool called SwitchX, which was put out by a company called Beeble. And we had shots from our Star Trek production. If you know Otoy, we've been doing Star Trek stuff for years, that were just really difficult. We had compositors that were trying to get this shot to work. It was shot on green screen. We'd scanned in the performer. We'd built the scene in 3D. And we were trying to get the actual green screen shot with all the ripples, reflections, all that to be blended with the 3D scene. And while we had all those elements, it really wasn't easy. And sure, we could have hired a whole compositing house to do it, but it was something that we just cut the shot from the piece we put out in 2022 for the Star Trek short. However, once we were in, I was preparing for our April conference, I was looking back at our node graph system, and we just added the SwitchX node from Beeble, and miraculously, it takes the shot, it takes our 3D asset, and it just composites it perfectly. If you notice, the water was rippling, the reflections are perfect, and this is an incredibly powerful example of how virtual production with a bit of the right tool set can actually be transformative. So this is the node graphs that I set up to make that shot work, and it was pretty straightforward. So again, I'm highly optimistic that the right targeted neural tools can be absolutely a game changer for production. Going back to world models and going back to IP and projects that matter to us, as I mentioned, Otoy's been involved with the Star Trek brand for a while now, but a lot of that is very personal. My best friend, Gene Roddenberry's son, co-founded the Roddenberry Archive with Otoy, and we've been building a lot of virtual Star Trek worlds and walkthroughs, and even concept videos and shorts. So the most popular one to date has been Star Trek Unification. That was put out about 2 years ago, got 40 million views. Dave Ellison was a fan. People really loved it, and it's a warm project. It was done, of course, before a lot of the generative video models that we have today are in place, but it was also done with the Nimoy estate. That's Adam Nimoy and Lawrence Selleck, who play Spock, Sam Witwer and Bill Shatner, and we brought back Kirk and Spock for this piece. And we definitely have a lot of thoughts and ideas on how generative AI fits and doesn't fit into these pipelines, but all of that work was done without generative AI in the mix. And I think that as we're looking to the future, we still want to have actors. We want to have real performances. It's just the environments, the production costs that I think could be massively reduced if we were thinking through things correctly. A lot of people are, of course, familiar with running Unreal through a virtual production pipeline. And we're also pretty well known for bringing the Star Trek world to life in a browser, right, running on GPUs, NVIDIA GPUs in the cloud. When we were looking at doing that for the USS Enterprise, we've been building that for years. It's meant to be a life-size, one-to-one recreation that users can go through, and of course, there's many different iterations of that over the years. We tried running it first through Genie, and if I'm not mistaken, this is the Genie 3 version. Let's see if it's pointing back. And it looks good at first, and then as soon as you turn around, things start going really wrong. And you start to realize, again, that world model memory is a real thing. Like, it's not just that it can get it right. For some of it, it has to have this persistence. And whether it's RAG or something else, we need that solved. I mean, you can see that it's kind of a mess there. So for now, our ambitions about creating the world of Star Trek as a world that you can explore and that has persistence is still using sort of the traditional rendering pipeline. But again, we're looking at things like being able to stream massive data sets off of disk, and this is the current enterprise model, not just one room, but the entire thing, every cubic centimeter practically mapped out. It's a beautiful piece of work. And it's something that as we're building this, we can film content on it. We can create narrative pieces on top of this. And I think when world models and normal rendering converge, and we can actually use some of the techniques that we're showing, like the SwitchX stuff, where you can blend real performances, virtual environments, all of that, you're going to have something really special. But we're very excited by what the future holds and even the progress that we've seen in the last year. And on that note, thank you very much.